Christopher Battles is the manager of the Marine Corps Combat Art Program, while also serving as the artist in residence at the National Museum of the Marine Corps. He is a contemporary artist who works in a variety of media honoring the highest traditions of representational art. Originally serving as a Marine reservist, Battles became a Marine combat artist after re-enlisting in 2006. He deployed to oversee contingency operations several times to create art for the United States Marine Corps. He served as a civilian combat artist for the Naval History and Heritage Command at the Navy Yard in Washington, D.C., before finding his current role on staff at the National Museum of the Marine Corps in Triangle, Virginia. Okay, so welcome to the show, Kris. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate you coming on the Patriot Art Foundation's podcast.
Well, I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. So tell us a little bit about yourself, because you have, as I said when I was introducing, you have one of the most amazing, most unique jobs in the entire military. But before you get into that, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm a former reservist, a Marine, and I'm the current artist in residence for the United States Marine Corps, and I work at the National Museum of the Marine Corps in Quantico. I was raised in Missouri, a small town. I joined the Marine Corps Reserve originally in 1986, right out of high school, and I was a young, history-loving, patriotic, Reagan era type kid from the Midwest. Went off to do my part. And I had some great jobs. I was a reserve, started out as a computer operator and went to school here in Quantico for that, and then worked that job for several years in my reserve unit, and then transferred into the public affairs, and I was a combat correspondent, which was another wonderful job. And then I got out in 1996, and then so then now to get where I am now, basically I had gotten out of the Marine Corps in 96. I never thought I would ever re-enlist. I just, figured it was part of my past. And then I saw, of course, the 9/11 happen, and then the global war on terror. And then we were involved, and I still was figuring I was too old, or I was just, wasn't going to do it. And then I saw this blog on the internet with Mike Fay, who was overseas doing combat art. He's a chief warrant officer at the time, and he had been actively doing combat art, which I had never heard of course, when I had originally enlisted, which I wish I would have known about. And but so I emailed him and said, I'm a former Marine, I'm a current artist. I was doing portraits and landscapes down in Florida at the time, full time. Had worked up to be a full-time artist, and so he liked the work, and he said, would you mind if I shared it with the curator of the Marine Corps Art Collection, and then the director of the Marine Corps History Division? And I said, sure. And the next thing you know, I'm getting interviewed, and they're asking me if even at 38, if I would re-enlist to become a combat artist for the Marine Corps. And so I asked the wifey, and she said, sure. And then so within a few months, I went from being a civilian and never thinking I'd re-enlist to going to MEPS to get the physical and all that stuff, having sort of flashbacks in the medical department as I'm getting probed and all that other stuff. And then, because it had been 20 years, 1 month and 1 day, I think is what it was, from the time I had enlisted to the time I had re-enlisted.
Oh, wow.
And so most people were retiring at my age, and I was coming back in.
Yeah, and you were going right back in.
Yeah, and it's interesting. So that was in late June of 2006. And then I got orders up to Quantico in August, and full-time orders in September rather. So August timeframe, I'm coming up to Quantico. September, I'm PCS'd. And then in October, I was in Iraq on a short-term deployment, my first deployment.
Hey everyone, it's Mary White with your quick art tip. Today, painting the model from life. 3 things to keep in your memory. AIM, AIM. A stands for asymmetry. Do you see how I have one shoulder, one higher than the other? One hand is different than the other, the head is tilted. I stands for interesting. Give us an interesting pose, something that's imaginative and unexpected. And M stands for motion. You want to make it look as though the figure is moving. So you see how I have her leaning forward. So AIM, keep those in mind when you're painting the figure. Okay, Rachel, that's great, thank you.
So when as a combat artist, when you're out there and you're saying you're trying to be an artist for the Corps here, what exactly are you taking photos for reference materials to go back and do a painting of? You're sketching in the field. You're doing all of that. Explain exactly, like give us a play-by-play of what it's like.
Right. So it does depend upon the artist's style. It depends on the artist's sort of skill set. We all try to be good reportage artists, and reportage is a fancy French word for, basically reporting. It's like urban sketching, but you're not in an urban sketching environment. You're in a combat sketching environment. So, but you are doing basically rapid plein air sketching when you can. You're actually, whenever it's possible, when there's some downtime, when you're not walking on the patrol, when let's say, for example, one time on a rooftop, they were calling in an artillery strike on an insurgent house about 200 meters away. And we were sitting there as they were calling in the airstrike. And so I was actually able to sketch the Marine that was calling in the strike, and then various Marines that were on the rooftop, because it was safe to do so. And but when you're on the patrol, of course, you're more like a combat cameraman, and so or like an embedded journalist. You're much more doing photographs, because nobody's going to stop, and say, and I'll be like, oh, the sun isn't right. Can we move the platoon the other direction? No, you just can't. They won't do that for you, right?
Right.
So the war doesn't stop for the artist, but so you really have to really look around, take photographs as quick as you can. So you're constantly looking for opportunities. You're looking for compositions, and you're looking, actually, believe it or not, you're looking for visually interesting or pleasing things in a not so pleasing environment. But you're also a historian in a way. You're also looking to record history, and that's one thing that reportage art does, is it records history. So you have to be fast with your pen or your pencil, depending, and then also a relatively good camera person.
Wow, that I mean, for a lot of artists, especially veteran artists, it's like, wow, where was that job when I was in the military? They didn't. When my recruiter, he looked me dead in the face and said, "There's no jobs for artists in the military." And even with that, he wasn't lying. He just didn't probably even know, because you were in the military and you didn't know.
Yeah, it's such a small world. It's just not very well known. Even today, when I'm recruiting and I'm sending out basic requests for artists, a lot of commanding officers and different people, even senior ranking staff NCOs or officers, they're like, "What do you do? What is this we're talking about?" They all have very good, talented people out in their units, and they like to use them, and they really like the fact once they know what it is. But as a matter of culture in the military, it's just not a very well known thing. It's one of those things where I'd always wanted to serve my country, and so I had a certain skill set on the art stuff. But how do you serve your country with art? Those two cultures rarely join, and so and it's an old tradition. It's not like it's not been done before. It's just that we forget about it in this modern era. And this was a struggle. This was something they actually thought about in World War II when they were standing up the Division of Public Relations in 1942, and they were looking to bring in combat correspondents and artists and photographers, journalists, and they struggled. They said, well, why do we need somebody to draw it when we have photography? We can send out, correspondents and photographers, and that should be fine. But there's just such a great, strong tradition. And as you know, the Marine Corps loves its tradition, and so does the Navy and the Air Force. And they've all got these long-standing traditions that go back to the 1800s of of people would come out to the combat and sketch it and send back to the newspapers. And back in the day, it was, of course, before photography, it was very much needed, people with talent in drawing. And so they could send the drawings to get engraved, and then they put them in the
Exactly.
papers.
Put them in the papers. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But looking back, anybody that's been in the military, the visual arts have always been a big part of the military. I'm thinking going all the way back to basic training. There were murals everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Every building had a mural inside of it, and a lot of them had a mural on the outside of the building as well. I remember having my commander was like, I want the squadron logo on the wall of the command center. Okay, Airman Gagno's out there at 3 a.m. with an overhead projector painting the squadron patch on the wall of the building,
Right.
like that. That's what we did, I mean, it's every place in the military, there are paintings everywhere. I mean, they're everywhere. And so I can see that, paintings have always had a big place in the military, and they always will. I mean, people love that aspect. I do. I mean, when I walk through a military base, you see all the murals. It's like, it's part of the history. It's part of the camaraderie. It's part of the rah, rah, rah a little bit.
Absolutely.
It is. And it's powerful.
Right. Yeah. People, I mean, you're from your private up all the way up to your general officer. They love it. It's just one of those things. There's something about, someone that can take the time to depict it, even if it's the private first class who's been told, hey, paint this on the jersey wall or jersey barrier, which actually I did for the squadron I was out with in 2007. I painted the big squadron logo out on the jersey barrier. It basically was house paint I was using at that time.
Yeah.
But so I was like, that wasn't really quite in my bailiwick or whatever they say, but I used to paint walls I've done murals before. So, but you're right. People love it as a culture. The military loves that part of it. There's just, whether it's, images that talk about what they're learning, practical applications, like, the M16A2 service rifle, we had in boot camp. I was one of the artists for the platoon because they found out I could draw. And so we did the range flag for the platoon. And nowadays the young Marine recruits will paint for the drill instructors, it's like a cover block or a place where they'll hang their cover on the wall, the Smokey Bear cover. Mm-hmm. And they'll do these great paintings on the piece of wood where they hang the cover. It's really beautiful. But we also would paint, an M62 grenade, fragmentation grenade, and you paint the picture of it so the recruit would see it, right? So you know what it looks like, and then you'd write the nomenclature of the thing next to it. And so let's say they're in the head and they're going real quickly. It's right there in front of them, or it's on the bulkhead in the squad bay, anywhere they can see it, so they can remember, But they also love the range flag, which is much more of the morale boosting and not just the knowledge.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's a big thing. The morale is a big thing. It's a great morale booster when you have things like that, and you need someone to make it. You need an artist, you need a creative to create these things. And the military is chock full of very creative people. There's so many artists in the military that are doing it as a hobby on the side because they're the artist in the squadron or they're in the platoon, or it's like, oh yeah, Sergeant so-and-so, he's the artist, he'll do it, and that's what it was. When I was they had this crazy silly thing called a Gagno original. And it was because the commander found out Airman Gagno can do caricatures. So I spent a ridiculous amount of time drawing caricatures of retiring bigwigs. Right. And it was a big deal for a while to get, when you retired, you got humiliated through art from Airman Gagno. It was a thing.
That is great. That's great.
And so it's like, but you always have that one guy or gal in the group that's the artist, and they get tasked with so many things. You went from that to being the guy for the whole Marine Corps. That's pretty impressive.
I'm Mary White, and if you're a veteran interested in telling your story through art, come join us at the Patriot Art Foundation, where we will help give you a means of purpose, connection, and expression through art. So come join us today.
Well, speaking of exhibits, let's do a little exhibit here and show off some of your work. I've got 3 of your paintings here, and I would love to hear the story behind them. You know, when they were painted, why they were painted, things like that. But let's take a look right here. This is our first one.
Aha.
Look at this. Tell us about this painting.
Okay, so this painting is actually currently on display sort of semi-permanently in the Marine Corps Heritage Foundation offices here on the second deck of the Marine Corps, the National Museum of the Marine Corps. And it is my favorite oil painting that I've done pretty much to date. So you picked well. This is a piece called A Little Light Reading. And it's, so I was out at a FOB or a patrol base out on Route Michigan in Al Anbar province. There were several little, HESCO barrier patrol bases, kind of like, Fort Apache in a sense. You have these little outposts on the road to provide security for the convoys and that sort of thing, right? Mm-hmm. And out of these patrol bases, they would patrol and, do the Marine Corps business and come back. And so I was in the little improvised chow hall they had, which was a shipping container that they had made into the little improvised chow hall. And they also had a shipping container where they were sleeping. So it's basically a squad of Marines or something, this little patrol base, not very much wider than maybe 30 yards, 40 yards wide, maybe, and then maybe 100 yards deep, made out of HESCO barriers, which are those large gridded or wired, and there's sacks of dirt you pour in, and they're like a big, gigantic sandbag, but they make walls out of these things. Anyway, so I see this cami netting hanging down, and I see these young Marines gathered around this, and they're making a fire because it's cold in November. This is November of 2006. Maybe it's early December. Anyway, it's beginning of the winter, and believe it or not, out in the desert, it is cold at those times, especially in the morning. And so they're also getting ready to transition this little patrol base over to the Iraqi army. So they're getting rid of trash and stuff, and they're burning this in this little ammo can, and they're keeping warm. And as they're doing this, they're chatting and they're reading. They're opening the mail from home, and one of them's reading the Marine Times, and one of them's reading Maxim, and one of them's reading like a Louis L'Amour, paperback. And so that's why it's called A Little Light Reading. But what struck me about the image was not only the sort of scintillating light coming down, dappling from the cami netting on the figures, but also the fact that it's a sort of slice of life, and these Marines are doing something that almost anybody can relate to on a human level. And so they're like making a little bit of home over in not their home. And but the composition struck me, and so I immediately grabbed my camera and my sketchbook, and I spent time taking a bunch of photographs. I sketched several of the individuals, and then this painting is 4 feet wide and 3 feet tall. It's a pretty good sized painting, and it's oil on canvas.
It's a big one, and it's in oils. It's beautifully done. One of the things that artists love to do is capture the light, and that's when I look at this painting. It's the way that the light, the way it lands on the ground and on the soldiers. It's just it's all there, and that's one of the things that makes it so beautiful is that light and that light reading, but also the way the light is just touching them.
Right. Ooh, good job.
Done. Great job. Great
Thank
job.
you kindly.
And then here is our next one we're going to look at. Oh, this is just fabulous. Tell us about this one.
Okay, so this is a portrait. So this is during it was a practice. This at Al Asad Air Base. This is in 2007 when the Osprey Squadron, VMM 263, went over to Iraq, and so it was the first combat deployment of an Osprey Squadron. And this is Captain Okuriba, and she's a captain aviator. She's one of the Osprey pilots, but she's right now in that image. She is standing guard because they've just given the warnings signal, and they're all geared up and armored up and waiting in case they have to defend the airfield and the offices for the squadron. And so I took a picture of her and decided to do the portrait in oil based on that picture.
Yeah, it's a powerful image. It's like she's alert, she's ready, but there's a sense of calmness about her.
Oh yeah, well one cannot become a what's that?
I said it's beautiful.
Oh, thank you very much. One cannot become a Marine officer aviator without a sense of nerves and calm, steady determination, basically.
Exactly. And that's one of the things as artists, when you're trying to, it's one thing to capture somebody's likeness, but it's another thing altogether to capture their heart, their spirit, a little bit of their soul in there. And you get a sense when I look at this painting, it's like you get a little bit of who she is in this. You can see it. And like I said, that sense of calmness amidst the storm is there. And that comes with training. That comes with, like you said, you don't get to be what she is without that ability. Right. And I'm getting that instantaneously from looking at this painting. So very, very powerful painting. I love it.
I'm very glad I put all that in there.
Well, that's what we're always striving for as artists. So
exactly.
And now this is another one. This last one here is another great painting. Tell us about this one.
So, okay, this is very interesting too, because this one, unlike the other one, the first one you showed, so the first one is very big. The portrait is sort of middle range, maybe 20 by 30, maybe, it's bigger than 16 by 20. This one is a 9 by 12 or 10 by something. It is a very small painting. It's canvas mounted to panel. It's oil, and it's done in partly in direct painting style, using palette knife and bold lights. Once again, I love painting light. I know that there's a certain artist that used to call himself the painter of light, and copyrighted that, as a matter of fact. But all painters paint light. Whether or not you paint nocturnes, you're still painting light. You have to know how light works in space. And the great part about painting is when it starts looking like what you want it to look like, but it's done in a painterly manner. And so this one is much more painterly than some of my work, which I really enjoyed. And it's also a great story. So when you can mix the formal aspect of painting with the content and the narrative, then it's just a wonderful mixture. And so this one is out in Rutba, and there's this is called Parley, I think, Evening Parley or something, at Rutba, and it is this Marine officer's at center, and there's these two local concerned citizens who've got an issue, and there's an interpreter there, a female interpreter on the left, who's talking with them and talking to the Marine officer, who's got his notepad in his hand and in his sidearm, and he's talking, and he's gathering information, and he's going to see what he can do about it. Yeah, we don't realize that when we put our Marines and sailors and soldiers in harm's way, a lot of times we're asking them to be diplomats as well. I mean, they're not doing foreign policy, but in a way they're obviously enacting the will of the United States, but they've got to do it with a face that is both, they said, no better friend, no worse enemy. You have to be compassionate, and you have to be open, but you also have to be firm, and you have to be able to go from diplomat to warrior within just a matter of seconds, obviously.
Right. That's got to be something. And it's as a man in his 50s, I look at that and I'm thinking, and we're doing that with babies. Most of the people that are going over there are their children. They're so young. It's like when I recently drove across Tyndall Air Force Base, and I haven't done that in decades. And I remember pulling onto the base, and and the gate guard pulled me over because I was staring at him. and he was basically like, "Why are you staring at me? I'm about to, you're about to be in a lot of trouble here, sir." And I just had to look at him and said, "I'm sorry, but I remember standing exactly where you are, and I don't remember being that young." and he kind of was not happy about that. He was a little insulted, but I was in shock at how young this guy guarding the front gate of the Air Force Base was.
Right.
He was younger than my youngest daughter. And it was just like, oh my gosh, he's a child, and and I was too when I was there. But it's like, then you get these young people going overseas and dealing with just what you depicted in that painting. Right. It's amazing the trust and the responsibility that we put on the shoulders of our young people, but that also shows how amazing they are.
Oh, right. People. Yeah, we still have a wonderful batch, every generation of people who are willing to do this, and they're smart, they're dedicated, they're all these things, and they really acquit themselves well. They really are great ambassadors for America.
Now, with that, all that said, talk to us about artists that are maybe making the transition, because you transitioned out of the military and you made a living as an artist. There are a lot of people they're about to transition to the civilian world, and they may be going, you know what, I've always wanted to be an artist. I've always wanted to dream of, going for this or going for that. There are some that are, they're that art person in their squadron or their platoon or wherever. And they're like, that's me. I would love to do this as a job, but how that, they're either afraid or they don't know how. What would you recommend for a transitioning person who wants to maybe go into the art fields in the civilian world? What would you recommend for them?
Oh, it is a hard world. I would recommend using your new GI Bill if you've got it set aside, right? I was lucky. I was very fortunate to get my master's in illustration through a limited residency program at the University of Hartford, and I did it with the new GI Bill, and I actually was able to do it on active duty with permissive TAD. My unit was very nice to me. It was just part-time little sessions that we had, and then I do my duty for all the rest of the year. And then anyway, so I would recommend using your new GI Bill. I would get out and get involved with local urban sketcher groups. I would say just keep involved in an area where they're going to inspire you and keep you going. And I would pursue higher education. And also I would make sure, this is one thing I feel sort of cheated by my undergraduate professors, no offense, as much as I love them. They did not teach us as artists, as art students, how to be business persons, and they should have done that. So it took me 20 years of good old-fashioned bohemian arts struggle. Now, out of that, I got really good at painting, but it took me a long time. And so if only there were more business savvy artists out there, I think it would be better off for everybody.
That can mentor.
Yeah. And so I think that my advice to anybody getting out of the Marine Corps, that's of course one of the reasons I think it would be nice to have an MOS to be able to retain some people that are very talented. But if you're going to go out and pursue art, I would make sure that you pursued really what your passion is, but you also have to make sure you got the skill set. Now, if you have the skill set and you have the passion, even if you're not super talented, if you have the passion, you're going to go a lot farther. But get involved with people that do it regularly. There are people out there in the civilian world that are sketching all the time. They can be an inspiration to you. The hard part is if you're all alone and you don't think that you have anybody to, nobody understands it, but there are great art communities out there. I would get involved and then pursue higher education.
Excellent advice. Excellent advice. It really is, one of the, you always hear about the starving artist, and my experience with artists that are in that category, if you will, it has a lot to do with business acumen. Well, I just want to say thank you to you, Kris, because first of all, the greatest job in the military, you win the award for that. Super fun. Awesome job. So thank you for sharing with us about your job, but also for your service. That was just, you have been places, and we appreciate it. And thank you for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Welcome, veterans, to Watercolor Boot Camp, where we are going to show you how you can tell your own story through art. I'm Mary White. I spent 7 years traveling the country, painting veterans from all walks of life and from every state for the project We the People, Portraits of Veterans in America. And that's where I learned how painting could be a way for you too, as a veteran, to tell your own story. We're going to show you how you can select your painting materials, draw it on the paper, mix the color, paint washes, and create paintings that you'll be proud enough to show your family.
I was a combat medic.
Army.
I hadn't painted in 55 years.
Since the 4th grade. I tried watercoloring once, it didn't work out very well. Not as hard as I thought it was.
And so what will your paintings look like? Well, they won't look like mine, and they won't look like anybody else's, because there's no one way to paint. There's not a right way or a wrong way. Your paintings will look just like your own, because maybe you like to paint every little detail, or maybe you like to paint big, loose washes and paintings that are almost abstract. You might like bright, vibrant color, or you may prefer neutral colors.
I'm learning and watching Mary, how she just throws paint on the canvas and all of a sudden it's a pair of boots. Amazing.
It sounds weird, but you lose track of time. And that's when you know you're doing something that's good for you. You'll be painting and all of a sudden you look around and it's like, man, it's been 2 hours. Oh, this is amazing. This is what I've been doing with my life, painting.
We're gonna come alongside you so that you can work at your own pace in your own home. And we're gonna show you how to paint big, loose paintings, still life, landscapes, flowers, animals, portraits, and even illustrated journals that you'll be proud to have as a keepsake.
It saved me. I hit a really deep spot, and it was the art therapy that it pulled me out. I get stressed, that's the first thing I go to. The problem still exists, but it doesn't affect me anymore.
We are so proud at the Patriot Art Foundation to partner with Terracotta to bring you these courses. And so now, let's get started.